Be careful what you wish for, dear viewer. While I've been bitching about the dumb, unimaginative, derivative dross being shoveled out by Hollywood over the past few years, Hollywood, as it turns out, has prepared a little answer for me. And that answer comes in the form of Christopher Nolan, a man who I can best describe as the cinematic equivalent of Hideo Kojima, only slightly less obsessed with scantily dressed, emotionally damaged women. Nolan's mind seems to be only tenuously connected to our own reality, and his unconventional approach to non-linear storytelling frequently turns conventional narratives on their heads, pulls them inside out, and bends them over a table with the teddy bear from my Doctor Who analogy. He's been responsible for some excellent movies in his career, as well as The Dark Knight Rises.
Of course.
But then came the news that he was releasing a new movie, a film so complex that it took him more than 5 years to figure out the script, and nearly 10 years to get the concept straight in his giant space brain. A film that promised to redefine our very concept of time and reality. A film called Tenet. But what the hell is Tenet? What's it about and what does it all mean? Well, who better to explain a movie centered around complex theoretical quantum physics, time travel and multiple realities than a drunken YouTuber with alcohol-induced brain damage? Let's begin, shall we? Tenet kicks off by introducing us to the protagonist, who's helpfully called Protagonist. I'm not kidding, that's the character's name in the credits. Fuck's sake. Protagonist is part of a CIA Special Forces team sent into the middle of a terrorist siege in Russia to extract an undercover operative that was trying to recover some kind of weird artifact. What is this artifact and why is it important? Well, bear with me because this'll take some explanation. Unfortunately, the mission goes tits up, the artifact falls into enemy hands, and protagonist gets captured and tortured until he manages to kill himself with a cyanide pill. Only, he doesn't die. The whole thing was a test to find out how much of a hard bastard he is, and whether he's worthy of being inducted into a top secret organisation known as Tenet. And he's just like, yeah, whatever. Because I would totally feel comfortable working for a shadowy group whose nature and purpose isn't explained until after you join, and whose entry exam involves allowing a Russian gangster to yank out all your teeth with a pair of pliers. Anyway, this is where we get our first taste of the movie's central premise. See, it turns out that people in the future have found a way to alter the properties of objects so that they can travel backwards through time. For example, bullets would go back into the guns that fired them, batteries would gain power over time, and my bottle of Jack Daniels would refill itself. Ha! Fucking sign me up right now, man! Objects that have been reversed like this are known as inverted. Science Lady believes that evil people in the future are using this reverse time to influence events in the past, resulting in a temporal Cold War. Wait, what? Temporal Cold War? Haven't I seen this somewhere before?
We're done with you and your damn temporal Cold War.
Nah, must be my imagination. Anyway, Tenet was founded to prevent this war from destroying the world. That's where Protagonist comes in. His investigation of the inverted bullets leads him to an arms dealer in Mumbai, who in turn leads him to a Russian billionaire named Sator. But in order to get to Sator, Protagonist has to make contact with his wife Kat, who Sator is blackmailing to stay with him because she accidentally sold him a forged painting. So in order to win her cooperation, they need to recover the painting to eliminate Sator's leverage over her and... Oh, fuck off, film! Jesus Christ, the plot for this movie reminds me of Rise of Skywalker. And not in a good way. It's the same sequence of contrived 1, 2, 3 objectives, only using people instead of MacGuffins. Find a thing to lead you to another thing that allows you to access the place you need to get to. Complicating things further is the presence of time inversion, which is accomplished by devices known as turnstiles. Walk through one and you'll come out the other side in the opposite time flow, which can result in some pretty weird phenomena, like getting into a fistfight with an opponent that seems to be moving in reverse. Injuries that get worse over time instead of better, and destroyed cars and buildings that magically reassemble themselves. The deeper Protagonist digs, the more he begins to understand the nature of the war he's fighting, and that certain characters aren't telling him everything they know. Remember the artifact from the beginning of the movie? Well, it turns out that that's part of an algorithm that can invert the entire flow of time through the whole world. Ultimately, the movie culminates in a desperate time-traveling plan to stop a madman from triggering time inversion on a global scale using the algorithm, thus destroying all life on Earth. Now, analysing Tenet like a conventional movie is a pretty challenging prospect, because honestly, this is the kind of film you probably need to watch several times to fully understand and appreciate, and I'm not gonna do that. There's an awful lot going on here, and while most of it eventually gets drawn together by some kind of explanation, you'll almost certainly be scratching your head for the first hour or so. Yeah, it's one of those films. Rather than introducing you to its world and letting you get a feel for the characters, the rules, and the stakes involved, Tenet starts off with a sequence of inexplicable events without any logical narrative tying them together, only for the non-linear plot to go back and fill in the blanks later. The idea is to put events and decisions into a different context once they're fully explained, encouraging you to see them from a different perspective. And while some of the twists will be pretty obvious to anyone that was paying attention early on, others just left me baffled when I walked out of the theatre. Speaking of confusion, the finale of this movie is about 20 minutes of absolute unbridled insanity. Superficially, it's a race against time. To storm an enemy base and defuse the algorithm before the bad guy can trigger it, while another character tries to keep him distracted. The difference is that the battle plays out in both forward and reverse temporal motion at the same time, so that one half of the attack force is watching the whole thing undo itself while fighting to reshape and direct events as they go. And all it did was throw up a bunch of questions about the mechanics of this whole thing, like when the inverted team uses their knowledge of the future to take out a sniper before he can kill a bunch of their own men. But then, if they prevented that from happening in the future, then how could they have just witnessed it happening in their past? Or when an inverted soldier gets caught by a reverse explosion that seals him inside the wall of a building. Like, how could that possibly function in the normal flow of time? Would his body just always have been inside that wall now? Surely the engineers who constructed the wall would have seen it when they assembled it in that case. If this is all making your head hurt, well, try watching the real thing after several pints of beer. It's a challenging experience, believe me. And it's definitely not helped by the fucking terrible sound balancing, which is so bad in places that I genuinely struggled to make out what the characters were saying, especially during important scenes where you actually need to understand what's going on and why. At first, I just assumed it was the generally shitty state of my local cinema, but apparently that's just how the movie is. You're making it pretty hard to like, you Tenet. I can't shake the feeling that this is a movie unfairly dominated by its central concept. Every event and plot point just feels like an excuse for another reality-defying set piece, rather than being an integral part of a compelling narrative. Especially the first half of the movie, that bounces around from country to country like a hyperactive James Bond movie, with a lot of go here and find the thing to get you to the next stage kind of busy work. It feels contrived rather than natural, and when you combine this with the borderline incomprehensible dialogue, you're left struggling to understand what characters are trying to do and why, and after a while, you kind of just stop caring. The characters themselves range from borderline interesting to bland and wishy-washy, and protagonist is probably the worst offender. He's tough and smart and wisecracking when the script needs him to be, but I never got a sense of who he actually was as a man. He goes to places and does things because his mission requires it, but there's no personal stakes or emotional investment for him. What little personality he does have is more down to John Washington's performance than the actual writing. Kat, on the other hand, is mostly dominated by her desire to escape from her controlling husband, and that's basically it. She loves her kid, I guess, but he's never really in danger, so nothing really comes out of that. Although she does make me laugh because the actress playing her is 6'3", and she absolutely towers over the rest of the cast. Weirdly, the standout of this movie for me was Robert Pattinson, who manages to switch easily between quirky, eccentric scientist and kick-ass, no-nonsense spy, with a bit of suave British charm thrown in for good measure. He always gives the impression that he knows more than he's letting on, which it turns out he actually does. Either way, he's pretty fun to watch. And in a cast that's generally straight-laced and serious, he actually seems to be enjoying himself. That's all well and good, but it's not enough to elevate the others, I'm afraid. Clearly, a lot of hard work and effort went into the mechanics of this film's action, but it stands out more as an impressive technical achievement rather than a gripping story that you care about. It's all competently shot and interesting to ponder on an intellectual level, but the lack of a strong emotional core or interesting character dynamics results in an experience that feels weirdly hollow and soulless. Basically what I'm trying to say with all this pish is that Tenet acts smart and looks nice, but you never really feel invested in what's going on. I'm also not sure I buy into the environmental message at the end, which feels kind of weak and half-hearted, like they stuck it in because they needed some kind of overarching message. But are you really telling me that scientists with the ability to reverse time itself haven't found a way to tackle global warming or colonizing other planets? Shame they didn't go interstellar.
Of course.
Ultimately, while I couldn't help but be impressed by the sheer work and effort that went into Tenet, something tells me it's unlikely to be counted amongst Nolan's best works. In fact, in some ways it represents his worst tendencies as a filmmaker, prioritising grandiose intellectual concepts at the expense of crafting an emotionally satisfying narrative with strong and interesting characters. Don't get me wrong, in an age where cinema is becoming increasingly watered down and generic, we need smart and challenging movies like this. It's just that they also need to be balanced out by fundamentally good storytelling. I guess the lesson I learned from Tenet is, you really should be careful what you wish for. Anyway, that's all I've got for today. Go away now.